with that, I'm excited to introduce our 4 speakers that we have today. 4 speakers. I'm going to give Ryan, Garrett, Kylie, and Ryan a chance to introduce themselves just now. And from there, we'll go in and kick off the presentation, and I will chime in at the end as well, too. So from there, I will pass it off to Ryan.
Hey, everyone. Ryan, number 1. I'm coming out of San Diego. I'm an associate creative director at BASIC, and I was the creative lead on the agency side of this collaboration. And at BASIC, I focus mostly on defining and translating brand expression for scalable digital platforms. I had the pleasure of doing so with this talented group and a lot more individuals that couldn't be here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Garrett. I'm a senior designer at BASIC. I've been there for about 3 years, and I work alongside Ryan, just more in the design system, in the files, defining a lot of our workflow, and also just working alongside the Herman Miller team through the entire design process. And yeah.
And I'm Kylie Crocker. I'm a digital product designer from Herman Miller. I live in West Michigan. It's rainy and pretty cold out today. And I had the pleasure of working on this project all the way from doing customer journeys through implementation.
Hi, I'm Ryan Ganss. I'm the UI design lead at Herman Miller. I'm also based in West Michigan. Our team is primarily focused on design systems and product design, but this was a really great opportunity to work with an outside agency, like Kylie mentioned, from concept through completion. So looking forward to getting into this.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to you and let you take the stage.
Thank you. Let's see here. Quick confirmation that people can see my screen.
Yep.
Looks great.
Awesome. Thank you. So I just want to start by saying thank you to everybody for joining. I really appreciate it. This is an exciting topic that we're all really passionate about. And as you all know, this is about designing together with Herman Miller and BASIC. So primarily this deck is focused around collaboration, but we do kind of get into the weeds a bit and jump into some files, but reach out with any questions or anything that you want to know more about or see. So with that said, to cover the topics that we're going to cover are an introduction to this project. What was it? What were the foundations of it? The first phase, which for us was around immersion and synthesis. The second, which was around the strategy and concepts. Third, which was the design execution and guidelines. And then finally, if nothing else, what are the key takeaways that we would say for all of you out there that are considering working with an agency or vice versa, collaborating with an in-house team?
And Ryan, just real quick, if you don't mind going full screen on the Figma window.
Oh, yep, sure can.
Awesome, thank you. And it's command period to get the, yeah, you got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So project foundations. The overall objective of this project was to create a truly exceptional customer-centric e-com architecture that can scale across all of Herman Miller Group. Herman Miller Group is our family of brands, and I'll explain a little more what that means in a moment, but this effort began with Design Within Reach. And so it was not only creating a scalable system, but also developing a refreshed brand expression for DWR. If we say DWR, we mean Design Within Reach. To just briefly outline what Herman Miller Group means, it is our family of brands. So that Herman Miller Group would encompass Herman Miller, a number of other brands, but what we're focused today on is Design Within Reach. This project began, and shout out to our UX team and Jeremy in particular, who helped facilitate a ton of research. So we had, I think it was an 11-week research project prior to kicking off this work with BASIC. where we did 80 plus customer interviews and identified, areas in customer journeys that we could focus on, whether it's an opportunity or something we're doing really well right now. We have a little visual that was something that we shared to help show and help people understand what customer journeys were and where our pain points were. Next was an agency partner in this introduction, which for us, it was a really exciting opportunity to look at who we considered to be world-class. And that was a term that we used a lot in this project. And it forced us to define what that meant to us. And so we spent a considerable amount of time just looking at experiences that we admired and what was innovative and what seemed to work really well. And BASIC certainly stood out in that. And the fact that they were so polished with holistic brand expressions, it wasn't just one page was good, the entire experience was really buttoned up. And here's an example of some of the work that they've had. And for us, it was the Google store and Heath Ceramics and how they were so individual and just a total package. So with that said, we're going to move on to the end of our introduction, which really is a high level look at the roles and responsibilities that we had. Once again, to focus on the collaboration, you'll notice that a number of these areas have both Herman Miller and BASIC team responsible for it. So the first aspect was really the customer research, which we had done up front. BASIC took that customer research and worked on an experience strategy, which we'll also touch on. The second part was brand expression and the identity of DWR and looking at the future scalable aspects of the system and how other brand expression could be applied to the system. And while that was happening, we were working on wireframes and concepts that came out of the Immersion. Next, we moved on to product design, visual design, and the style guide. So that was a collaborative effort on that with both the in-house and agency. The iterative customer research Herman Miller took on. We'll talk about that. And then finally, the development and execution of the site, which was both of us. So phase one, immersion and synthesis. What does this mean to us? This encompassed stakeholder review interviews, UX research and customer journey maps, creative workshops, developing how we work together, our ways of working, and then finally the experience strategy. So with that, I'm gonna have Kylie take over and talk about our project kickoff.
Yeah, so we had to start the immersion phase. We had 2 in-person workshops, and those really set the tone for our collaboration throughout the whole process. We had the first one in West Michigan at our offices in West Michigan. So BASIC came to our offices, and in those meetings we had stakeholder interviews. We had a deep dive and look into our customer journeys. We discussed ways of working, and we also had a very killer baked potato bar for lunch one day.
Yeah, and then I'll speak to on the BASIC side. So then the second kind of set of workshops, we switch offices, we come down to San Diego so they can kind of see how we work. And really this is just to meet each other, see what everyone's really good at, talk about roles. And we even go for dinner and just make sure we kind of connect and kind of meet on that level. But at the same time, we also talk about the experience brief review. And this is what Ryan was kind of speaking to a little bit. It touches on really a lot of that research that they're bringing to the table that they've already done. And they can call out really specific things that they want to solve or that they know are kind of the main pain points. And we kind of write briefs within our briefs directly about those pain points. And along the journey, we specifically will answer those questions. And they're kind of our top bar success states, where if we know we nail those kind of top points, there are top friction points coming from the client. And then from there, obviously that leads into a lot of ideation, and we love just being in the same room. And to be honest, in the collaborative phase of how we're working today, Figma has been kind of where we've moved into this feature ideation, since we can't be in the same room. But it's just a room of sticky notes. And I think you'll see a little picture of kind of what that's like. But it's really a time for the client who knows their product so well to kind of walk us through where they are today, how they work, how they make new pages. And we can really think about how we can work together and set those benchmarks that we're trying to hit. And then lastly, we just wrap up with like how we're going to work. What are the files? Who's going to do what? Who's going to take care of the style guide? And we talked about that a little bit in our flow this presentation, but really just setting those standards and making sure everyone knows exactly what their roles are and what they're going to be responsible for.
Yeah, I think ways of working is certainly a big one. So for us, like the meet and greet can be really interesting for two teams coming together, right? Is it going to be like some outsiders, socials versus the greasers? Like I won't say who in this call would be on either of those sides, but you know, it's really about collaboration and like working together. And we love this GIF in particular because working together is so important, and puppies and dogs play an important role in this process in a minute. Kylie, do you want to just talk about ways of working for?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important or impactful conversations we had in our first workshop in Michigan was we sat down at a table and we just discussed like individual strengths, and I think it really level set all of our strengths when we're joining a new team.
For sure.
And the next slide will help too, because that shows a little bit of our.
Yep. So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
This is just covering, at the beginning of the project, we really thought through what our file organization was going to be. And so I think that really helped us like hit the ground running, so we could just start designing and we could easily find what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I even love how the screenshots here are the wireframe folder that we had, and then the final sort of dev delivery. And you'll even see the evolution of like starting to use thumbnails with titles in them to make things more scannable, as well as just a quick look at the way that we structured pages, which we will cover later in the presentation too. And then lastly, like to finish this and round out the puppy theme here, was like working together, and especially at BASIC's office where they're very dog friendly. They bring their dogs in. So we spent a significant amount of time snuggling some pups, and it was just great team building, and I think was a really special and important part of our collaboration. So next, at the end of each one of these sections, we wanted to give just a look at the actual artifacts that were involved, and then also look at sort of the collaboration of who was responsible for what. So in this phase, we had customer journeys, which were done up front. We had existing brand positioning. We wanted to give BASIC everything that they needed to hit the ground running in the evolution of the brand expression. We wanted to provide analytics and performance so we could start to like forecast and look at possible outcomes. We had the experience strategy, which BASIC had created, which was a deck that kind of took in our journeys and then looked at opportunities or just areas where we could make an exceptional experience. BASIC ran stakeholder interviews, which I think were great to kind of get outside of just our digital team and bring in other opinions from outside of us. Shared project documents, so cloud-based tools like Google Sheets and things like that, to where we could all get in there and keep active, like what's the progress and when are things due. And then finally, the Figma organization, and just level setting on like, whose organization are we working in? And then for Herman Miller, that got a little more intense because we have group, how do we handle brands within the organization, and what is our structure between org, team, file, or project, and then file, and how can we kind of keep this moving forward as we think about being scalable. So next, we have strategy and concepts, so phase 2 here. In this phase, we covered visual inspiration, exploration, content mapping, site architecture, experience concepts, and user testing and refinements. Garret or Ryan, do you want to cover the conceptual research?
So we wanted to show a little bit, and this is a little bit of a peek inside one of our early on decks, and it goes back to the conversation I had about you know, the clients coming to the table, and Herman Miller's coming to the table with all of this research and all of these even multiple years of already working on this brand, and they know a lot of their competition who are doing things well, or even in other industries, of people that have figured out, you know, interesting ways of doing things. And we wanted to be able to really quickly be able to bring a lot of ideas to the table that were based on our experience briefs. So lots of these were answering very specific questions about shipping, or how do we let people, how do we educate people in different ways, or how do we excite people? And giving real life examples was for a couple different reasons. One is just to make sure it's possible. We want to have something that's like a ground mark for us, our dev team, our engineering team. How are they even, you know, getting into their SKUs, and how are they, you know, organizing things? Because something like DWR, they have upwards of 10,000 products on their site at sometimes. And we obviously need to work within a large library and kind of bring these things to the table super early, so we don't waste time on things that maybe are going to be out of scope or not achievable. And then this also kind of creates a discussion of setting a benchmark of the standard that we're trying to hit, which again, we bring engineering in super early. They get to see all this, they get to see the kind of standards we're trying to hit, and everybody kind of gets to have their say and kind of talk about both the creative side and the actual build of it.
Awesome. So next we're wireframes. So obviously we use Figma for this. We used dated pages where we could track progress. Collaboration gets covered a little more later in the deck. But here we would just be commenting, but we made sure with options to kind of inline document what the differences between each concept were, and then also included any sort of development notes or any kind of data requirements we might need. So that's just a quick look at wires and inline documentation and development notes.
And I think I'll just add, Ryan, something that was happening as well is, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, so Herman Miller also had 6 designers on their team. So all of these things were kind of happening at the same time in different tracks. And so we would collaborate and meet twice a week to go over kind of where everybody was. But this wasn't necessarily like concept research happened and then wireframes happened and the research happened. Everything's kind of happening at the same time. Again, going back to where we've set those roles earlier in the project.
Yeah, that's a great note. And actually something I had intended on mentioning up front was just that while Kylie and I are here representing the Herman Miller team, there was a large product design team that was 6 of us, including, you know, our UX team was a part of this, our content strategy, shout out to Carl, was a part of this. So while we're here, there was certainly a bigger team. And a lot of this was happening at the same time.
I feel like I should add to the basic side as well. Ryan and I were from the design side, and then we also had a developer just kind of sitting alongside us the entire project, who really jumped in full time at the end to help with some of those style guide and small motion pieces, and kind of setting the standard on a digital style guide, which Kylie's going to talk about later.
Next we have visual language.
Awesome. Yeah, so to kind of continue to echo what, you know, Ryan and Garrett and even Kylie was mentioning before, is, you know, a lot of the power of this collaboration was that we were able to each, you know, define some of our tasks that were really based on our strengths, and we were able to each, you know, go down parallel paths at the same time. So, you know, as the Herman Miller team was going through the conceptual research and wireframing exercise in tandem, Garrett and I, along, you know, another designer, we were able to start exploring art direction for the site experience. And, you know, rather than getting into the weeds of the visual language itself, you know, I'd really love to discuss from a high level more of our process and how we approach defining that visual language with, you know, a collaborator like Herman Miller. So when we do go through this process of presenting, you know, visual languages or visual directions in these early stages, we really try and push everyone on the project, from executives on the client side down, you know, just to our design team, to thinking of them as digital sketches. And, you know, that's for a few key reasons. First of all, is that we're really just trying to get to the pure brand essence and the expression, and we're completely removing user experience from this exercise. So we wanted it to really be purely about look and feel. So, you know, we're throwing things up on the wall and we're seeing what's going to stick from the group, and just really what feels right from a brand perspective. You know, is the typography, the color treatment, all of these elements that are coming together, does it feel right from a visual language standpoint, and can it elevate this brand for, you know, their future presence on this digital platform? So, you know, that's ultimately where we start. And it's really a conversation starter. Again, it's meant for us to be able to latch on to certain elements and to poke holes in others as we continue to refine this process. And you can see on this slide some of a lot of examples of the high fidelity places where we landed, but to kind of continue down this process, on our side at BASIC, one thing that we found is really successful is to actually take our design team and put them into like complete isolation, so that each designer or creative is able to come up with their own ideas, being completely removed from any sort of information from any of the other creatives that they're working alongside of. And we find that we get really pure and true ideas from each individual creative that way, that we're not finding a lot of overlap, or that if we're sharing a lot of work throughout this process, that you can kind of see a lot of ideas start to merge together, and we end up just kind of with a lot of singularity rather than a lot of wide thoughts and creative input at this stage. So that's a piece that we found really important in the early stages is this isolation. And throughout this process, in terms of finding that brand essence, it's really it's largely instinctual. So obviously we've gone through a lot of strategy, and we've had stakeholder interviews, and we've gained a lot of information in terms of what are the client goals, and what does Herman Miller and the DWR team want to do with this brand and this new digital platform. But this is ultimately where the designers instinct and where their good taste and all of those things they've learned as a creative come into play, and we get to see how do they want this to come to life, and what are the different ways we could approach this project from a brand perspective. And as we continue down this process, it's very loose at first. We're casting a very wide net, and then through many rounds of refinements and collaboration with the client, we continue to hone in on those elements that we are resonating with, and that we feel can uplift this brand for a really long time to come. And ultimately, that's from a very high level, trying to make this complex thing feel very simple. That's how we land at this screen at the very end. A lot of conversation, a lot of iteration, and a lot of refinements of being open and communicative, and not taking any of our ideas too sacred, and just it's just a constant iteration process throughout the entire design phase. Ultimately, we like to latch on to one direction. We often find that we do end up Frankensteining a lot of ideas from multiple designers' creative inputs, which can be good and can be bad. But I think in this process, we found that pulling from a lot of those great small pieces that were resonating, we ended up creating this really dynamic and rich visual language that could support DWR for many years to come. And that.
Awesome. So next, we're going to take a look at user testing in refinements with Kylie.
So as the visual language is developing, we were also doing iterative user testing so that we could get feedback from the customers as we were in the design phase. So we had 2 designers dedicated to prototyping, and we were working very fast. And this was the first time we used Figma for any sort of like intense prototyping before. So there was a bit of a learning curve, but we moved very quickly, and we were able to do, I think, we did several rounds of like navigation testing, A/B testing. We did full homepage to check out configurator user testing. And I think it was really successful because it was the first time we were able to like really get that customer feedback throughout the process and iterate.
Definitely, and we'll look at some of those prototype here.
I just want to add too, just as a piece there too, like shout out Figma. I think this was our first project for both teams in Figma. And we nerded out so hard on prototyping, and it was like a whole new world to us to be able to actually design in our prototypes. So when we needed to move a button or replace a button, we didn't have to rebuild things. We didn't need to drop in new files. We literally went in, and if we had to round a corner more, we rounded that corner more. And yeah, I think that's just worth calling out, because the flow for us was one of the fastest, most efficient flows I've ever seen, going from design and prototyping. And one major piece was our prototypes always matched our designs, because we didn't necessarily have to work in two places. So I just thought I would just throw that little shout out into the chat.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
So the artifacts for this phase, it ended up being a conceptual research and inspiration gathering deck that we put together, the visual language concepts, the navigation concept, and other user testing, and then feature wireframes. So phase 3, which was our final phase, which is the design execution and guidelines, and where a lot of this, the Figma work happened. So design collaboration is a key aspect that we want to call out here. The design review process, the style guide and component library that we created, and then finally the templates and guidelines. So first, and probably the biggest and most important thing for this conversation was the design collaboration. And so I think the key elements that we wanted to talk about were the consistent feedback loops that we had, the fact that we were using live things like Google spreadsheets with assignments and just knowing who's working on what, utilizing the different time zone differences. So, you know, we had a 3-hour difference between us and BASIC, and we were able to sort of like do a review midday, give BASIC their workday to go through it and provide feedback, to where in the next morning we would be able to hit the ground running, and then have a couple times a week where we could actually meet in person. So like, even though we weren't working at the same time, it was actually kind of perfect in that they had time to like sit and think about the stuff that we were proposing. And you'll see here a couple of screenshots. The background would be an example of some in progress wires that we had for our PLP tiles. How we had inline documentation kind of describing what the intent was and what the rationale, and then these comments. So much collaboration happened in Figma comments, to where it would be like, great idea, what if you tried this? Or I actually think that this is the option that we want to go with, or you know, just kind of communicating back and forth. And then also a quick note just to the layer palette, or I'm sorry, the pages, and how we would use dated folders to kind of show the progress, but also note anything, anytime there was a creative review, or if we were reviewing with developers, and sort of like isolating those things to where we knew when it was time to review. Did you guys have anything you want to add to this one? I know that this is a big one.
No, I mean, I was just going to echo that, you know, as simple as a commenting tool can seem, that this was probably one of the most important tools that we needed in terms of like really making sure that our efficiency across this 3-hour time difference was working to our advantage. And, you know, we just got into this flow like Ryan was describing, and it just made it so easy to end our day on this cadence of reviewing work, and then Herman Miller's side being able to get up and hit the ground running 3 hours ahead of us. And it just continued this really efficient cycle just through simple commenting feature. Yeah.
And also just to talk about commenting a little bit more, like we ended up having in the past a floating PDF that's like this thing that you're trying to find constantly. When is it outdated? Like, did they note after a different stakeholder noted? But getting things in one place where a stakeholder could jump in and comment and see the conversation that's already been happening was such a lifesaver, and something that we had never experienced until we sort of jumped into Figma here.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have anything on this?
I'll just add just more on like the actual working side of the file. You can see that little layers panel like Ryan was speaking to the different reviews and dates. And I just wanted to add, we never had 2 versions of files. We stayed the entire project. We had a wireframes folder and a design folder, but say a homepage, which we're going to look at in a second, we never left that file. And I think that was really huge for us, because you can see where we shared a creative review. We would kind of lock down the file with the settings that they had through sharing. We could share prototypes of just those pages so they could scroll on their browsers from executives who weren't logged in. but we never left that file. And that allowed some of our design managers, they wouldn't necessarily have to come and ask us, like, where's the file? And so we would just kind of notice when someone was in a file, but usually we had moved on from that creative review, but just, it was really nice to never have to duplicate file, or we never named anything final or version 1 or version 2. We simply dated our work and stayed within the same file.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Absolutely. So next we had design reviews, which were such a key aspect to this as well. And so in the same, to piggyback off of what Garrett was describing, where we were working in one place, to be able to present from that place too and make real-time updates, whether it's a stakeholder review, executive leadership, or development partners, everybody's looking at the same things. And while we might craft an actual prototype to be a little different, this was so incredible. And the GIF that we're looking at here is an actual example of a live prototype where we had mouse enter for the trigger that was presenting swatches that then could lead into a modal for a preview and then applies. And this was great. And I think that this is actually an opportunity where we wanted to just briefly show the actual prototype. So I'm going to switch over to Figma here. Can everyone still see my screen?
Yep.
Fantastic. So this is like obviously madness as far as the prototype is concerned, but the result was really incredible. And while, let me actually, hold on a second. This is a part of in the file, right? A little scrappy here. I'm going to jump over to this prototype. So here we have you know, these hover states that are happening. This was just great to paint a picture, whether it was a stakeholder review or a developer that was trying to understand how things worked. This was an important factor also, was to start to emulate where things were fixed and where they sort of detached. So we got pretty creative with mouse enter and mouse leaves to transition to different artboards here. Which was just great to kind of paint a picture. You can even see here where when we get to the bottom of the configurator section, where we're sort of detaching and going into more of the marketing content in UGC, the top nav, the secondary nav that's on every PDP kind of flies into the top too to help emulate, like, once you've bypassed our primary add to cart call to action, we have this nav dropping in. So we could get really close to like what we actually had envisioned. As well as including video content and interactive pieces and showing our actual image modals. So this was like a huge, rich feature that helped us across the board, whether it's leadership or development reviews. Does anyone else have anything to add for these reviews?
I would literally just add that if anyone doesn't know, those are GIFs in the prototype that play as videos. And that was a huge unlock for us to figure that out.
Yeah, it just makes it so much more real. It was a great tool. So I'm gonna hop back into presentation here. So with that said, let's get into the style guide.
Yeah, so one of the biggest wins, I think, was the collaboration with Jason, who's a front-end developer at BASIC. So we collaborated with him and as well as BASIC designers to create a live version of our style guide. So obviously we had a style guide in Figma that's static, but he basically coded that so that the developers, our development phase, they could reference that and get animation, also the animation style guide. So yeah, I think that you guys want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think on our side, this was kind of one of the first times we'd approached it in this manner, and working with, you know, a large e-com platform. In the past, you know, we've done a larger scale development in terms of handing off high fidelity developed pages and site experiences, and then going through kind of the rough process of trying to translate that into the whatever e-com platform that our client's working on. And throughout that translation period, a lot of things can go wrong, and it's just there's just a lot of variables that are introduced. But in this in this instance, we were able to, again, for the nature of this project, be really scrappy and use the developer, Jason, on our side in a really efficient and wise manner, in that he was actually getting into the DWR code base and taking all of the global elements from our style guide that you saw and giving them code that they can actually use and implement site-wide across the site experience. So setting up the grid, setting up the hover states, setting up the carousels, all of those global pieces that are going to make up, the atoms that make up the larger pieces of the site experience. And it really it took less time on our side, and it ended up with a much better final product in the end. So it was an awesome collaboration and development standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add is just to kind of remind back to the beginning is we're building this platform as a future-based system for a lot of other brands as well. And this was going to be used as kind of like a variable table as moving forward in the different styles and needs that would be needed for each project. So this moved on to 2 other brands where that styling can kind of just be applied to the same variables, and all those pieces and the amount of work and everything is already kind of scoped and done. And it's more about kind of getting in there and changing styles. And then you have all these variables to start building those kind of pages and pieces in the new style for the new brand. So there's a nice little like transition period after this project for the Herman Miller team to kind of continue building this into other brands as well.
For sure.
Yeah, and then continuing on to the component library. So obviously the style guide informs this, but this is just a single source of truth for all of our components. So the modules that make up pages, and we have them all collected in one library so that we can do all of our documentation here within this file. And we also assign an owner to this library so that we don't get any duplicate components or like inconsistencies.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump into one of our files now, if you want to switch over, Ryan.
Sure.
So we've seen a lot of individual pieces and style guides, a lot of the components that Kylie was just describing, but we thought it'd be great to see, paint the picture, connect the dots a little bit, and see how a lot of these pieces come together to build out a lot of these different pages across the site. So this is an example of the homepage, and this is a file that we would hand over to the DWR and Herman Miller team to ultimately get ready for final development handoff. And I think, the key things I really want to call out here is first, just to get a little bit of the lay of the land, and I'll kind of describe a little bit more of what you're seeing here. But we have a couple layout examples on the left. And then as I pan to the right, you see a lot of individual modules that are pulled out into isolation. And ultimately, these are the tools that we're providing the DWR team to be able to build out different homepages. And I think some of the key insights there, one, I think this looks like a lot, but ultimately what you're seeing is a lot of subtle variance. And the reason we have so many subtle variants of our modules, a 2-up and a 3-up, a carousel, left and rights of each merchandising module, is because we had a lot of conversations with the merchandising and marketing teams on the DWR side, and they have a need to constantly refresh their site. They're always running promotions, they're always having key marketing initiatives, seasonality, things of that nature, a lot of sales. So the site needs to be constantly refreshed, and they have a lot of different content needs in terms of how they're merchandising their product on the site. So this is ultimately the set of tools that we gave them from an individual module perspective that they can use to pull and populate with content and tell those merchandising stories. And then, the other piece, if we look at the actual examples, which I'll zoom in a little bit on, is sure, we want to meet their content needs, but we could probably do that with a far smaller library of modules. But we wanted to give a lot of other subtle variants so that we're training the internal DWR team on how to create what we always describe as this sense of rhythm throughout these page layouts. So, we want to create a sense of familiarity and consistency whenever you come back to these to the homepage, but we also want a sense of freshness so that when we are populating a new promotion or a new seasonal moment, that the site feels fresh and it feels fun to explore, and you're discovering new layouts and new relationships between modules. So you can see in the red here, we've distilled a lot of rules, which I won't get into, but all of these individual modules and variants come with theory, and we give a rhyme and reason for their existence and how they should be implemented, with the ultimate goal of creating these page layouts that do evoke that sense of rhythm and really elevate the content as you're going throughout these landing page experiences.
Awesome. So to round out this section, we've had design presentations, which were once again a collaborative effort between both agency and in-house. We have the style guide, which was the static version as well as the digital version. We have our component library, and we have our flexible templates. So with that, we would love to just get into a few key takeaways and then take any questions. So we'll kind of go through this quickly because I know we're sort of reaching the end of our time. But the first thing that we wanted to talk about was just be like water. And what we love about this is like the Bruce Lee example of like water entering a cup and becoming the cup. In that same way, to work with another agency or in-house team, you sort of have this opportunity to just be comfortable trying new things and adapting tools and processes, and just would encourage everyone to have an open mind and be like water. The next one was just how might we's, and I feel like these were so crucial to our working together. And I even love in this photograph, you can sort of see one of the how might we's that we have, which was how might we be more transparent with logistics and fulfillments. So if we go back to our customer journeys, this was one of the key pain points that we had, was like transparency and shipping, and really trying to get to the bottom of that and like sticking out like potential solutions or features that we might want. Is there a track bar in your account that follows the progress of your order? Is there, just like what are the considerations to do something like that? And even on the right, how might we solve for scale? So while people are at home viewing online, how do they know how big a sofa is? How can we help them understand? So just positioning things as how might we's is just every problem is an opportunity for design. So encourage how might we's. Next is something that we probably learned the hard way to an extent, which is just like starting that style guide in foundational spot right away. We sort of found ourselves at the end of the process meeting and sort of having to refactor a lot of things that really were all the same style, but just weren't connected to a base. And so I would just say, start the style guide yesterday. Next is championing the system, which is something that for me in particular, like taking that possession of what was this collaborative effort with BASIC has been really important, and it comes up a lot. And so if we think about things like, we're obviously on the in-house side, someone saying like, why is X the way that it is? You have to know things well enough to be able to give an answer that's not like, well, the agency did that, so like championing the thing and really owning it is just such a really crucial part of this. And I'm also open any of these up to any of the other panelists to jump in.
If they keep going, we'll get to questions.
Okay, stick around. Was just encouraging people to be available for questions. I don't know how many times I've reached out to Ryan and Garrett, and our team has, just to say like, hey, what do you think of this or this? And being available is really important. And then lastly, this, which is just all about becoming a good teacher of it. So like, especially on our side, the in-house side, we have created this thing together, sort of started to champion it and own it, but then to be able to teach it and show like our own content teams how things work and develop tools to where everyone can utilize the system is something that we're obviously still learning as we go, but very important. So those were the key takeaways. I think I can stop screen sharing and get into some questions.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming, Ryan.
Thank you for so much. This has been just a wonderful presentation to learn and understand how you guys put this together. I got to say that scroll to trick on the prototype thing, pretty amazing stuff. That's really cool. So we have a ton of questions that have come in. We will do our best to get to everything. Starting more on the side of collaboration and just your experience in working together. Jacob had a question around what were some of the biggest challenges in terms of adaptation of the new system across all of the brands. How did you tackle that? I know that you mentioned that you guys maybe currently also in the process of that, but what were some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think, you know, on our side, we knew that was the task up front. So we had to approach DWR design system in a simplistic enough way that we knew it could stretch across other brands with different look and feels. And the way we approached that was setting it up to where basically we could potentially switch over a few of the styles of certain elements of the design language, something like the font or the UI, and easily be able to adapt it to a different look and feel that felt appropriate for Hay, or it felt appropriate for Herman Miller. So I think a big key insight was that we wanted to make the module system and their structures hyper simple and let the individual design elements take on more of a role. So the typography, the UI, the use of open space and content. And I think by approaching it that way, you can easily just shift over a couple things and it takes on a new expression for the other brands.
Yeah, I think this is also super top of mind in like an active project for us, is to determine how does that translate to Figma in particular, as we look at organizations to teams. And like we have these components that are scalable and you can apply brand expression to them, but what does it actually look like for a designer using it? Is it like duplicating an entire project or team and then like revising it, or does it lose connections? And so we're really thinking about what does a white label component look like that ends up getting pulled into a brand and then brand expression being applied. And so if anyone has any tips on that, hit us up. But yeah, that's definitely top of mind.
Very cool. Yeah, awesome. And for anyone who's interested, you can definitely check out Figma's YouTube channel. There's a few videos on how to handle some of that stuff as well, and go into a bit of depth. Sticking with just sort of the topic of the experience of working together, Casper had a great question. It seems like there was a lot of time talking and meetings and trying to make sure that you understood the problems. Is that a regular thing for you? And is that something that you just do when you start new projects in general?
Yeah, I can speak to this. We definitely champion collaboration at BASIC. The more we talk, the more we understand, and we definitely like to open up Slack huge and just open that to anybody asking questions, and we encourage people to ask questions. Our kind of take on it is, we much rather everyone over communicate and ask questions than, assume something or feel out of the loop. So in Slack, there's literally constant conversations happening between either individuals or teams. And then at the same time, we met twice a week. And that was something we do kind of like on all of our projects. We usually set up those weekly meetings, and we try to do them on consecutive times so that we can get into that kind of flow state. And for us, that worked really well because we were able to comment in files, have daily conversations in Slack, but also meet every 2 weeks and kind of make key decisions with either Ryan or some of our managers on the Herman Miller side.
Yeah, and to continue that even more, we do start every project with an intense immersion and strategy phase. So we spend, anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks pure conversation, immersing ourselves in the brand, getting to understand the client's needs, what their goals are for the future, and setting ourselves up for the creative side of the project. So we always start projects with heavy focused immersion into the brand itself.
That makes sense. So it sounds like from there, are you able to, and Maurice had a great question around just the process timing in general. Like, are you able to anticipate or communicate that? It sounds like maybe there's a piece there. How long does that look like, or is it different from project to project? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's more of a production question. I'm not sure I'm the best to answer that. Too bad we don't have a producer on here, but it just depends the nature of the project, the scope of the digital experience, what their goals are. There's so many different variables that can go into it in terms of like how long that strategy phase is. But at a minimum, we generally spend, several weeks developing the strategy before we ever touch creative.
Yeah, and just to back up a smidge, I would say we did really try to be protective about focused work time. And so we did focus a lot on collaboration and the fact that we were meeting frequently. But a lot of that was happening through tools like Figma, where we didn't have to stop work to go have a chat with somebody. It would happen like overnight to where I could answer or like give feedback or receive feedback and just continue working. But we would, the time zone thing helped us, right? So we have like this 3-hour chunk of the day where we are separate and can really get like heads down time. And I would say that is probably a missed key takeaway, is to make sure that you're blocking that focused work time as well as those like very collaborative meetings. So we definitely did that.
Awesome. Building off of that a little bit, so that was one of maybe the points. Was there anything else in the collaboration aspect in particular that felt rocky to you, or any recommendations that you might make? I mean, obviously, we've got the ending pitch slides of good takeaways, but was there anything in particular, things like thrashing or goal alignment or anything? Or
I think the only thing that I would mention, which I did actually see a question coming through with like file versioning and how come you guys kept the dates and kept those kind of file versions. And I think something we noticed very quickly was things needed to stay existing. We would share something out and we don't really know the kind of conversations or circles it's going to go around. So if someone needs to refer to something, 5 days later, but they don't want to show what we're working on right now. They want to show like what we presented last. It was very simple to be able to kind of pull up that past link and nothing was moved. So I think, something that in the collaboration side that we just saw was people needed to kind of like leave things and move forward rather than kind of changing things or versioning necessarily directly in Figma's file versioning.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's something that we hear quite a bit too on our end as well, is that be very liberal with your iterative style versus trying to replace stuff that's already there. Version history is great, but if you think about it more as a literal linear path of the things that you have done, that you may want to compare two things side by side, and you're going to need both of those things in front of you.
Yeah.
So, very cool. Moving a little bit on to while we're getting into a little bit more of the Figma side of things, it looks like you've got a lot of stuff, and Kylie, you were talking about this too, where you've got the whole library file in there as a single Figma library. How are you guys managing performance? Obviously that can be a big thing for people. It seems like you have a lot of imagery going on too. Do you have any tips or tricks for anyone?
I can talk about just from the prototyping standpoint. We learned kind of the hard way to optimize images before we pull them into the prototype, because that configurator prototype did not perform very well. So that's just a tip.
Got it. So optimizing assets. In fact, there's even a few plugins out there too that I would mention. Downsize is a great one if you're trying to just that will actually take all of your images in your file and reduce the size at once. So very cool. What were you guys, as far as, I think we may have already touched on this a little bit, but as far as branching and iterating on ideas, were you, from any tools that either you were using previously, how are you doing that now in Figma? It sounded like maybe Pages, but I don't know if you guys want to elaborate on that at all.
Yeah, like every day we would create a new page so that we could create, like a design repository, and it's really like, it's cool to look back on now and just see like the progression of the design. And we sort of need to evolve that a little bit now that after launch. And we're just thinking about that now, because obviously it will get too large. So at some point, we'll create new files.
And as you're going through that too, we had another question come in just around finding yourself. Did you find yourself needing to go back and altering the style guide as you were building your designs, or did you force yourself to stick with the style guide as you had it? What was your approach there?
I mean, I'm sure Ryan has a pretty good point of view on this, but it was definitely a constant iterative approach. I mean, we were adapting it. We tend to move pretty fast just because, there's certain milestones that need to be met for a launch. And I think the nature of this project that we did try and get as much of a foundational guide as possible, but you can only forecast so much up front. And as you get into those minor, nitty gritty details of the system on more and more pages as you build out, you find that some of your initial thoughts just aren't jiving the further you get into the process. So it was definitely an adaptive approach where we were constantly updating the style guide, and the more examples we had, it just kind of got more and more refined.
Yeah, you're in a file and you get that notification that there's an update and you're like, oh, what is it going to do? Yeah, it was just something, it had to happen. And I think that kind of goes back to where we had a person that was responsible for it. There are a few people on our team that are actively maintaining and kind of the owners or champions of the style guide to make sure that, they could also give some communication. I think Figma does a great job of letting you know what things are changing, but just it's communication. And
yeah. That's an important point. I think oftentimes we want the tools to do all the work, but it's good to remember that the tools are there to help elevate the conversations that you're trying to have, not replace them, right?
Absolutely.
Great question came in from Andrea around in your actual files, in your design files, you had it looked like what appeared to be just a single breakpoint between desktop and mobile. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, that was awesome, and it saved us a lot. And it was essentially we utilized the same layout across mobile or kind of medium to small devices with the same grid. So if we have a 6-column grid on extra or small devices, let's say 375, it's a 6-column still at portrait tablet. And so if you do one, you've done them both, and things are just growing proportionally. So it was really kind of nice, and it saved us a ton of work, because in the past we've been like pixel pushing at all 4 breakpoints typically. It's like so much work, and just like, yeah, so we definitely streamlined, and it worked out really well. The front end style guide helped a lot just to already have the grid established in the columns and a real functioning piece that demonstrated it. But the simple rule of like, if we did mobile, we did mobile. If we did desktop, we did desktop. And then in between, it was sort of interesting to think about things like text and like spacing styles. Because we said, oh, at this certain, tablet landscape, we start our desktop text styles, and that just goes on through. And then it, the mobile is under that. So you do 2, you've done them all.
I will say on that note, we did document that, but we had to have a conversation with the developers just to make sure they understood. So.
Yeah, and we also, you're right, we also had to make some changes too, or comp some things that were like, oh, that's simple, it's just mobile. And then there was something like navigation was a big one where it wasn't as cut and dry, and we really needed to refine those middle points to accommodate more primary nav items, or just keep them up longer and not hamburger out so quick.
That makes sense. While we're on that topic, as far as working with your developers and the development team, I know we touched on that very briefly a little bit. It sounds like you have ways that you communicate with them, but what does that process look like in general as far as delivering and working with the developers?
Well, this, I'll speak to the basic side, because this project had two different sides of development for it. So on our side, we had a single developer, Jason, who we worked with throughout the process, vetting ideas, making sure we weren't presenting anything or getting too deep in the process for ideas that can't, really, that are going to be out of scope or just aren't feasible for development. So he, on our side, was really there to just throughout the process to vet creative, and then ultimately to build out that global style piece. But then on the Herman Miller side, working with a third party, platform development team, they have a little bit of a different, point of view on that probably.
Kylie, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if we have time to fully get into the process.
We can save that one too, and certainly move it into a conversation online afterwards. Thank you for spending a little bit more time. Just one last, we had a question come in just around sharing the presentation now. So this whole session will be recorded. I'll leave it up to the four of you to decide if you want to send out your presentation. Generally, we do like to publish these to the Figma community so you can find them as well. That's something that we can certainly help with too at the end, just that you know that we have that. With that being said, I apologize for any of the questions that we weren't able to get to today. We do just want to be respectful of everybody's time here. Thank you all so much for your presentation today. The last thing that I just want to mention is we have lots of future live streams that are coming up all the time. Our next one's going to be next Wednesday. We're going to do an in the file of governing your design system. Ashley from Pinterest and Taylor from Fidelity and Mark are going to come and talk a bit about their design system behind the scenes and how they keep that operation going as well. Again, a humongous thank you to Ryan, Kylie, and Garrett for today. This was a really fantastic presentation. If you want, I'm sure you can find them and reach out for more questions and things like that too. And I can always keep the conversation going in the Friends of Figma Slack too. So if you haven't seen that, it's friends.figma.com. You can get in there from there. And thank you all so much.